A city people admire even today. They speak of its discipline, its greatness, its order. But the truth, boss? The truth hides in the cracks of its marble walls. Rome did not rise because it was noble. It rose because it learned how to control fear, how to break people quietly, how to turn suffering into a system. And nowhere was that more visible than inside the arena. Before we walk into that darkness, welcome to the History Veil. If you wish to see the side of history that textbooks hide, the side empires bury deep beneath myths, then subscribe, like, and share this journey. Because today, we lift a curtain Rome never wanted raised. Beneath the arena floor, the air was still. The prisoners knelt in silence, chained wrist to wrist. Their bodies weak from weeks of marching. They weren't criminals. They weren't monsters. They were people caught in the path of an empire that refused to hear the word no. And as they waited in the shadows, they listened to the sound above them. 50,000 Romans chanting, stomping, shaking the wooden beams with excitement. The gate opened. Light spilled through the darkness like a blade. The prisoners were pushed forward, stumbling into the scorching sand. The crowd erupted. This wasn't justice. It was appetite. An appetite Rome fed every day. At the center of the arena stood a gladiator, his armor dented, his body bruised, but his breath steady. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't free. He was a man Rome had shaped, not through honor, but through necessity. Because in Rome, entertainment wasn't accidental. It was engineered. The prisoners knelt in a line. The air held still. The gladiator raised a single hand, and the entire stadium fell silent. Attendants stepped forward, carrying wooden boards, iron rods, and burning brands. Rome called this a reward. The prisoners knew better. This was ritual. This was judgment. This was how Rome reminded everyone who controlled fate. The first prisoner lifted his chin, a tiny act of dignity. The crowd hissed. Rome hated small acts of courage. The gladiator couldn't show mercy. Even mercy had a price. So, instead of killing the man, he ordered a ritual designed to break identity slowly, to make a man repeat words that didn't belong to him until he no longer recognized himself. But the second prisoner refused. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He stared into the gladiator's eyes with a fire Rome spent its life trying to extinguish. And the crowd felt it. A shift. A spark. Something Rome never tolerated for long. The gladiator ordered the trial of endurance. The man was forced to stand under burning sunlight. Arms stretched wide. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then more. His skin cracked. His legs trembled. But he did not fall. And in a place built for death, something dangerous appeared. Hope. The crowd grew silent. Rome could crush bodies. But hope was an enemy, far harder to kill. Then a sound echoed across the arena. A sharp trumpet blast. A sound that froze everything. The emperor had arrived, draped in scarlet, surrounded by guards. He watched the man who refused to drop. He studied him, the way a predator studies a challenge. With a slow gesture, he ended the trial, and with another, he ordered something older, something darker. The prisoner was dragged to the center and tied to a heavy iron frame. The ropes were soaked in water. Under the sun, they tightened, crushing bone, digging into muscle, pain without blood, torture without the mess. Rome mastered this art. They didn't want the man dead yet. They wanted him erased. A hood was placed over his head. A scroll was read aloud. Accusations of treason and defiance. Lies spoken loudly, so truth could be buried quietly. The crowd stared, confused, fascinated, afraid. Rome wasn't punishing a man. It was punishing a symbol. The gladiator turned his eyes away. He had seen this before. Once in his life was already too many. But then, something strange happened. The prisoner moved, even bound, shaking, half burned. He tapped his foot. Soft, slow, deliberate. A rhythm, not random, not panic. A signal, one only a few would recognize. The gladiator did. A tribal pattern, a code, a heartbeat from a life Rome had stolen from him. And then the prisoner whispered a name, a forbidden name, a name the gladiator believed died years ago. His world tilted, his breath froze. The emperor saw the shock in his eyes, and he responded with suspicion, with anger, with a gesture, by sending 4 guards forward to silence the truth before it spread. And in that moment, everything began to break apart. The word the prisoner whispered did not scream. It didn't echo. It simply sank into the gladiator's chest like a quiet blade, a name he had buried long ago, a name he forced himself to forget just to keep surviving. And now, in the center of an arena built on lies, a man Rome considered already broken whispered the truth. The guards marching toward him didn't hear it. The crowd didn't hear it, but the emperor did, and he recognized the shift in the gladiator's eyes. That alone made the moment dangerous. The prisoner whispered again, the same forbidden name, soft, but sharp enough to slice open old wounds. The gladiator felt the world tilt. The heat of the sun vanished. The sound of the crowd faded. For the first time in years, he felt something Rome had spent a lifetime trying to remove from him. Memory, connection, hope. The emperor's posture changed. Suspicion crept into the way he studied the gladiator. This was no longer a ritual. This was a threat. He raised 2 fingers, sharp, quiet, final. The guards descended with their shields lifted, not to enforce order, but to silence truth. The gladiator moved closer to the prisoner, under the illusion of obedience, but his voice was barely a breath when he whispered, "What do you know?" His heart pressed against his ribs, like it wanted to escape. The prisoner didn't lift his head. He didn't struggle. He simply let a final piece of truth fall from his lips. He is still alive. The gladiator froze. His son, the child he believed lost to fire and steel, alive. For a moment, the entire arena felt weightless. The emperor saw the tremor in the gladiator's shoulders, and he understood instantly what was happening. A spark had returned to a man Rome believed it broke forever. The emperor would never let that spark grow. He lowered his hand. The guards attacked. The first guard's blade flashed toward the gladiator's head. He instinctively ducked, sand rising beneath his feet. The second rammed his shield forward, the impact shaking the gladiator's bones. The crowd roared, still believing this was the performance they came to see. But this was no show. This was Rome, eliminating a man who knew too much. A third guard struck him from the side, driving him onto one knee. The fourth soldier moved in, with chains meant to take him alive. The gladiator's chest heaved. His vision blurred, but the memory of that whispered truth held him upright. He rose again, fighting with a ferocity Rome had not seen from him in years. He elbowed one guard in the throat. He dodged another's blade. He kicked a shield aside. For a moment, the crowd believed they were witnessing the greatest twist in arena history. But in the imperial box, the emperor didn't blink. His eyes stayed cold. This gladiator wasn't performing. He was resisting. Up above, the emperor gave another signal. A quieter one. A deadlier one. On the upper levels, archers stepped into place, their bows lifted as one. Shadows stretched across the arena sand. This time, the arrows weren't meant for the gladiator. They were meant to silence the prisoner who carried forbidden knowledge. The prisoner felt it too. His breathing quickened beneath the hood. With the last of his strength, he whispered again. There is a map. Before a guard struck him in the chest, stealing the breath from his lungs. But even bruised and bound, he continued, fighting through pain, north of the valley, beneath the ruins. His voice broke. Your son waits. The gladiator felt something inside him ignite, an emotion Rome had tried to crush. Purpose. He blocked another spear, knocking a guard to the ground. He stumbled, bleeding, choking on dust, but he didn't stop. Not now. Not anymore. The emperor rose. His cloak shifted like a shadow in the sunlight. He extended his arm outward, and the archers drew their strings tighter. The gladiator lifted his head slowly. He didn't look at the soldiers. He didn't look at the emperor. He looked at the prisoner, at the truth that had just saved his soul. The order dropped. Arrows flew. The arena exploded into chaos. The gladiator dove behind a cracked pillar. As arrows shattered against stone, sand blasted into the air. The crowd screamed. Guards shouted orders, drowned in panic. But the gladiator forced himself up again, grabbing a fallen shield from the dirt. Then, a chilling sound cut through the chaos. The lower gate opened. A wave of heavy footsteps marched in rhythm. The emperor's most feared soldiers, the immolation cohort, entered in formation. Black armor, crimson crests, eyes filled with discipline and cruelty. These men didn't serve Rome. They served the emperor's fear. The gladiator felt his breath tighten. He remembered their voices, their torches, the night his village burned. These were the same men, the same executioners, and now they were coming for him. Their boots struck the ground in a slow, steady rhythm. Spears lowered, shields locked. They marched as if no human stood before them. Only an objective, only an erasure. The prisoner, barely conscious, whispered through the pain, "Find him." Before they do, the gladiator didn't need more. He steadied his stance, even bleeding, even shaking, even outnumbered, because a man fighting for survival moves differently than a man fighting for his child. The cohort charged, and the gladiator returned to his feet, ready to defy an empire.
The whisper from beneath the prisoner's hood struck the gladiator harder than any blade in the arena. It wasn't the volume of the word, it was the truth inside it. A truth he had buried, abandoned, forced out of his heart just to survive. A truth Rome never wanted him to hear again. And in that instant, the sand seemed to still, the heat seemed to fade. Even the crowd's roar felt distant, as if the world itself had paused to witness what would happen next. The prisoner whispered. The name again, soft but sharp, like a quiet memory trying to find its way back home. The gladiator staggered inside. Years of loss pressed against his chest. For a moment, he wasn't a weapon. He wasn't a performer. He was a father remembering the one thing Rome had stolen from him. And far above, the emperor saw the shift. The tremor in the gladiator's stance. The flicker of life returning to a man the empire believed it had emptied. Suspicion replaced confidence. His eyes darkened. And with a slow gesture, he turned the arena from a spectacle into a silencing. The guards moved in, their shadows stretching across the sand. The gladiator stepped closer to the prisoner, pretending to follow orders, pretending to continue the ritual. But when he leaned in, his voice was barely a breath. "What do you know?" The prisoner's head tilted. His voice cracked through the hood. "He is still alive." The words struck like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. The gladiator's breath left him. His vision wavered. His son lost. In fire and chaos alive somewhere in a world Rome claimed to control. For a moment, there was no arena. No crowd. No emperor. Only a father listening to the most important truth he'd heard in years. But truth is dangerous in empires built on lies. The emperor raised 2 fingers. The guards attacked. The first soldier lunged. The gladiator reacted on instinct, stepping aside, letting the blade cut on the air. Another shield slammed into his ribs. He stumbled but didn't fall. The crowd cheered, believing this was part of the show. They had no idea they were watching Rome attempt a quiet execution. Sand flew beneath his feet as he dodged another strike. A blade scraped across his forearm. A second guard crashed into him, nearly knocking him down. The gladiator fought, but he was outnumbered, and Rome wasn't looking for a victor. Rome was looking for silence. Then, the prisoner tapped his foot again. Soft, rhythmic, intentional, a signal, a tribal pattern, a message from the past the gladiator thought had turned to. Ashes. Hope whispered in a language Rome tried to erase. The gladiator rose again. He elbowed one guard in the throat. He dodged. Another strike. He slammed his knee into a shield. He forced himself upright. Driven by something Rome could never program into a man. The emperor saw the defiance rise. And he answered with escalation. Archers stepped forward on the upper levels. Dozens of arrows aimed downward. The sky darkened with steel. The prisoner fought for breath beneath the hood. With each gasp, another word escaped. "There is a map," before a soldier struck him, stealing his air. But he continued, desperate to finish. North of the valley. Beneath the altar, his voice shook. "Your son waits." Time slowed. The gladiator felt the world return with violent clarity. He had purpose. He had direction. He had something worth surviving for. The emperor lowered his hand. Arrows flew. The arena exploded in panic. The gladiator dove behind a cracked stone pillar. Arrows shattered around him. Dust rose in clouds. The sound of bowstrings snapped across the air. With shaking hands, he grabbed a fallen shield, lifting it just in time to block another volley. Sparks burst against the metal. His arms trembled. But he held firm. Then the ground vibrat, a deep, heavy rhythm. Boots striking the sand in perfect unity. The immolation cohort entered the arena. Black, armor. Crimson crests. Faces without mercy. The emperor's personal executioners. The gladiators. Breath tightened. He remembered their fires, their torches, the screams of his people. The night his world ended. And now, they marched toward him again, this time to end whatever truth had just been whispered into the light. Their formation tightened. Shields locked. Spears lowered. They marched like a single creature with many armored limbs. The prisoner tried to lift his head one last time. His voice barely survived the pain. "Find him before they do." The gladiator's jaw clenched, his stance steadied. Even wounded, even outnumbered, even hunted by the most feared soldiers in Rome, he rose again. Because a man who fights for survival moves one way, but a man who fights for his child becomes something Rome cannot predict. The cohort charged, their war cry shaking the sand, and the gladiator stepped forward to meet them, not as a gladiator, not as property, but as a father. Defying an empire. The archers holding their bows felt like shadows standing above the arena, each one frozen in a moment that could decide everything. The emperor's hand hovered in the air, steady and cold, waiting to fall. The gladiator stood in the sand with his chest heaving, gripping the shield that barely protected him. The prisoner hung against the burning frame, breathing in faint, broken whispers. And Rome watched with the hunger of a beast waiting to swallow whatever courage dared to rise. Then the emperor's signal began to fall. But something interrupted the death sentence. A sound, deep, ragged, ancient. The prisoner, bound and burning, pushed his body upward. His knees nearly buckled, but he forced himself to stand. And then a single roar tore through his hood, a tribal war cry. That carried the weight of a people Rome claimed it. Destroyed. The arena froze. The guards hesitated. Even the archers lowered their bows for a heartbeat. And the emperor. He recognized the cry. His expression broke for the first time. Not with fear, but with memory. He knew that sound from a night long ago, when fire rained on a tribe Rome wanted erased forever. A tribe the gladiator belonged to. A tribe that wasn't as extinct as Rome believed. The roar echoed against stone, as if awakening something buried beneath the arena. The gladiator felt it travel through him like a forgotten heartbeat, returning to life. Rome could crush anyone, but it never learned how to kill a memory, especially one that refuses to die. Then the emperor snapped back into control. He slammed his fist down. The archers raised their bows again. The cohort braced themselves. Rome was done waiting. It wanted silence. The gladiator felt danger closing in, and he moved. He dove sideways just as arrows shattered against the sand where he stood a moment earlier. Dust exploded around him. The crowd screamed. Guards scrambled. He rolled to his knees, grabbed the fallen shield, and lifted it just in time to block the next wave of arrows. Sparks burst against the metal. Each strike felt like thunder shaking through his bones. The emperor wasn't finished. He gestured sharply toward the lower gates. A low rumble rose beneath the arena. A new rhythm, slow, heavy, terrifying. The gate opened, and the emperor's personal enforcers marched into the arena. The immolation cohort. Black armor reflecting firelight. Crimson crests flowing like blood in the wind. Faces carved with discipline and cruelty. These men didn't protect Rome. They erased threats before they had the chance to grow. The gladiator's breath tightened. He didn't just know these soldiers. He remembered the night they came for his people. The torches, the screams, the destruction. Now they marched toward him again, this time under the empire's full weight. Their shields locked into a wall of iron, their spears aimed at his heart. The prisoner, hanging against the frame, forced out a last broken whisper. "Don't let them find the map," his voice cracked. But the message, like everything he'd said, carried a quiet fire. The gladiator looked at him, looked at the ropes tearing into his skin, looked at the truth he had risked everything to deliver, and something inside the gladiator hardened. Pain turned to purpose, weakness turned to will, and the fear Rome planted in him evaporated. The cohort charged as one. The gladiator rose to meet them, even wounded. He moved with a clarity Rome couldn't understand. He swung the shield into the nearest soldier, sending him stumbling. Another thrust a spear, but the gladiator deflected it off the broken rim of the shield. A third soldier's strike scraped across his shoulder. Pain flared, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. Not after learning his son still lived. The crowd didn't cheer anymore. They didn't laugh. They watched in stunned silence, as a gladiator defied everything the Empire told him he was. A weapon that refused to be controlled. The Emperor stood, cloak shifting with anger. His voice cracked through the arena, summoning even more soldiers. Archers repositioned. Cohort. Lines tightened. The entire force of Rome moved to crush one man and one whisper of truth. Then the prisoner's voice rose again, fragile but full of meaning. North of the valley, beneath the altar. His strength began to fade. Your son waits. The gladiator's world sharpened. This wasn't survival anymore. This was destiny. The cohort commander raised his spear and aimed it directly at the prisoner's heart. The emperor nodded. The order was clear. End the symbol. End the spark. End the thread that connected truth to the world. The gladiator didn't think. He moved. He sprinted through the sand, ignoring the burning in his legs, ignoring the blood on his arms, ignoring the agony in his ribs. He raised his shield just as the cohort soldier thrust forward. The metal clashed with a violent crack. Sparks rained across the arena. The force knocked the gladiator down. But the prisoner lived. The emperor's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened into something cold and absolute. He lifted his hand one last time and gave a command Rome hadn't heard in years. Bring out the execution beast. The crowd gasped. The cohort stepped back. Even the guards lowered their weapons, because this time Rome wasn't sending soldiers. It was unleashing a monster. The gate trembled before the sound even reached the arena floor. A deep, heavy impact, then another. Each one shaking dust loose from the pillars, echoing through the bones of every man who dared to stand near it. The crowd didn't cheer now. They watched in tight, breathless silence as Rome prepared to unleash something far beyond human control. Even the cohort, Rome's most feared soldiers, shifted their stance, their confidence cracking. With one final crash, the gate burst open, and the execution beast stormed into the arena. Its massive frame was wrapped in iron-plated leather. Its jaws opened with a roar that felt less like sound and more like a wave of force. Its eyes glowed with the savage hunger Rome spent years feeding into it. This was no animal. This was Rome's answer to disobedience. A symbol of power that crushed anything that dared to defy the empire. The gladiator stood bloodied, exhausted, barely able to lift the cracked shield in his hand. But his eyes, they held something Rome never planned for. Purpose. The kind of purpose a man finds only when he has nothing left, except the truth he must protect. He looked at the prisoner, limp and barely breathing. He looked at the emperor above, watching with cold arrogance. Then he looked at the beast, and exhaled, a calm breath. One last moment before chaos swallowed the sand. The beast charged first. The ground shook beneath its weight, sending ripples through the arena floor. The gladiator dove aside as its jaws snapped shut where he stood a heartbeat ago. The sheer force of the beast's momentum threw sand into the air. He rolled, grabbed a broken spear from the ground, and faced it again. The monster turned with another roar, ready to strike. The gladiator didn't run. Instead, he stepped into the charge, sliding beneath the beast's enormous neck and driving the spear upward. The weapon splintered on impact, barely slowing the creature. But pain made it recoil, buying the gladiator seconds he desperately needed. Seconds Rome never intended him to have. The cohort saw the opening and moved in. But they weren't here to save him. They were here to kill him. And the beast didn't distinguish between enemy or ally. As the soldiers advanced, the monster lunged toward them, crushing a guard under its weight. Screams tore through the arena. Shields broke like twigs. The formation the emperor depended on scattered instantly. Chaos finally swallowed Rome's. Silence, and the gladiator used it. He ran to the burning frame where the prisoner hung, ropes cutting into his blistered skin. With shaking hands, he cut the knots loose using a shard of metal. The prisoner collapsed into his arms, weak, trembling, but still alive. Still holding the truth Rome couldn't allow to survive. With the beast rampaging behind them, the gladiator hoisted the prisoner over his shoulder and sprinted toward the maintenance tunnel beneath the arena seats. The emperor shouted orders, but nobody listened. The cohort was already in disarray. Civilians pushed through the exits. Servants fled through side passages. Rome's perfect machine cracked open under fear. He entered the tunnel, darkness swallowing them both. Torches flickered along the walls, lighting the narrow path. Water barrels rolled across the stones as workers fled. The gladiator pushed forward, every breath burning, every muscle screaming. But stopping was not an option. The prisoner's life depended on those next few steps. And somewhere out in the world, so did his son's dot at the end of the tunnel. Stood a wooden door thin old, meant for servants, not escape. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into it, once, twice. The wood splintered on the third strike, breaking open into the cold night outside. Air filled his lungs again, sharp and fresh. Freedom, fragile and fleeting dot. He gently lowered the prisoner onto the stone street. The man's breathing was shallow now, fading, flickering like a dying flame. The gladiator knelt beside him, voice low, steady, desperate. "Where is he? Where is my son?" The prisoner lifted a trembling hand. From inside his torn clothing, he pulled a small cloth fragment, a piece of a map marked with symbols only their tribe would understand. He pressed it into the gladiator's palm, his fingers shaking. His voice barely escaped the hood. "Find him before Rome does." His hand fell still, and with it, the last witness to a truth Rome tried to bury. For a long moment, the gladiator sat in silence beside him. Not crying, not breaking, just breathing, accepting, honoring the man who crossed fire and torture to deliver hope. Behind him, cohort horns echoed across the streets. The emperor's soldiers were spreading through the city, searching for two men Rome wanted erased from history. The gladiator rose slowly, the map fragment clenched in his fist. His armor shattered, his body broken. But the fire inside him, alive, burning, steady, a flame Rome failed to extinguish. He stepped into the maze of narrow alleys, disappearing into shadows. Like a ghost, the empire feared more than rebellion. Rome believed it controlled every fate. Rome believed it chose who lived and who vanished. But on that night, under the cold breath of the Roman wind, a single father walked away from the arena, carrying a map, a promise, and a purpose. Rome could break a man. It could chain him. Beat him, erase his name. But it could never kill the spark that drives a father to find his child, and somewhere beyond the valleys and ruins Rome tried to forget, that spark was ready to burn an empire.